The lights dimmed, the audience held its breath, and the stage seemed to shrink under the weight of one girl's pain. Courtney Hadwin, the 14-year-old sensation whose voice had once electrified millions, now stood trembling under the glare of global scrutiny. Simon Cowell, known for his icy composure and unflinching critique, suddenly broke down on live television, tears streaming down his face, a raw, unguarded moment that stunned the world. What could have driven a man celebrated for his professional detachment to such visible heartbreak? Behind the fame, behind the viral performances and standing ovations, lay a hidden story of relentless pressure, isolation, and the crushing expectations of a world unwilling to let a child simply be a child. As millions watched, the facade of stardom cracked, revealing a truth far darker than anyone anticipated. How did a star so young become trapped in a system that demanded perfection at the expense of her innocence? And could anyone save her before it was too late? The stage lights flickered, spilling a cold, harsh white over the polished floor, illuminating a girl whose energy seemed too vast for the small space. Courtney Hadwin stood in the center, her fingers trembling slightly, clutching the microphone as if it were a lifeline. The audience erupted into applause the moment she appeared, a wave of sound that should have been exhilarating. But for her, it pressed down like invisible chains. Every cheer, every standing ovation, carried with it an unspoken expectation. Perfection. Behind the cameras, beyond the lens that captured only charisma and confidence, lay a home life steeped in pressure. Rehearsals that stretched late into the night, whispered admonishments masked as guidance, the constant reminder that every misstep could undo the fragile wings of her burgeoning career. Simon Cowell watched from the sidelines, his usually impassive face revealing the rare flicker of concern. He had seen countless talents rise and fall, but something about Courtney unsettled him. Her voice, a raw, electrifying force that seemed to transcend age, was wrapped in fragility, a delicate brilliance that could shatter under the wrong touch. In those quiet backstage moments, he noticed her fatigue. The faint shadows beneath her eyes, the subtle slump of her shoulders, the way she closed her eyes and drew a shuddering breath before stepping back into the light. There was a tension there that no applause could mask, a pressure cocoon that threatened to suffocate. The performance began, and Courtney's voice tore through the auditorium, rising and falling with the force of storm winds. Each note was perfect, but beneath the triumph was a trembling fear, an unspoken question she dared not voice. Would she ever be allowed to falter? The cameras captured her energy, her exuberance, the smile she wore like armor, but never the silent tears she shed later that night. The nights she lay awake questioning whether the world's adoration was worth the private torment. And then, in a single heartbeat, the perfect rhythm fractured. A misstep, subtle yet undeniable, and the invisible pressure snapped, sending shockwaves through the stage and the hearts of those who knew her. Simon Cowell, witnessing the unraveling of a girl whose talent had become a beacon for millions, felt an uncharacteristic pang of helplessness. This was no ordinary slip, no momentary stumble. It was the exposure of a truth long hidden. Brilliance comes at a price, and sometimes, that price is a child's innocence. The audience gasped, the cameras lingered, and in that instant, the cracks that had quietly formed over months widened, threatening to swallow both performer and mentor alike. Before the bright lights, before the viral videos and televised standing ovations, there was a small, quiet house where Courtney Hadwin's world was shaped by love and expectation, yet shadowed by the early weight of judgment. Her laughter once echoed freely through the rooms, a sound unburdened by the watchful gaze of strangers. But as her talent began to surface, even in small, private ways, that innocence began to fracture. Every song she sang carried not only her natural brilliance but the unspoken pressure of approval. Family, teachers, mentors, all quietly measuring, waiting for her to rise or falter. The child who once sang simply for joy found herself rehearsing relentlessly, memorizing lyrics and perfecting gestures long before most children understood the meaning of responsibility. School corridors, which should have been spaces for friendship and ordinary teenage exploration, became arenas where absence, tiredness, and distraction set her apart. Friends whispered about the constant travel, the interviews, the shows she attended while they stayed behind. A longing for normalcy simmered beneath her exuberance, a quiet ache she hid behind bright smiles and impassioned performances. She was both extraordinary and trapped, the duality gnawing at her quietly like a shadow she could never outrun. At home, late at night, the house grew silent, and the mask of confidence slipped. Courtney's inner monologue was a torrent of doubt and fear. "Am I enough?" she asked herself, a question she could not voice aloud. Every misstep, every technical slip in rehearsal felt magnified, as if the world's expectations had seeped into her very bones. The tension was not only professional. It was deeply personal, woven into the fibers of her self-image, and relentless in its quiet cruelty. Even the praise, when it came, was a double-edged sword, a reminder that adoration depended on flawless performance. Simon Cowell observed this transformation from a distance, noting the quiet moments where the child beneath the performer flickered into view. Her hands would shake slightly while waiting backstage, her gaze dropping as if to hide from unseen eyes, her shoulders taut with the effort of holding herself together. He recognized the collision of two worlds, the innocence of youth and the merciless demands of fame, two forces in constant, brutal tension. The emotional strain, subtle yet undeniable, foreshadowed a future reckoning. The chapter of her childhood was a careful balance of hope and fear, joy and anxiety, a precarious dance along the edge of brilliance and burnout. And as the world cheered and watched from afar, Courtney's internal struggle intensified, invisible to millions yet ever present, a shadow growing heavier with each passing day. How long could a child endure this relentless scrutiny before the mask slipped entirely, revealing the vulnerability and fear that had been hiding behind the voice the world adored? As Courtney Hadwin's name spread across the globe, carried on viral videos and social media chatter, the applause that had once felt like magic began to take on a different weight. Fame, once a distant dream, became an ever-present reality, shining a light so intense it left no shadows untouched. Every performance, every camera angle, every tweet or comment was a reflection of expectation. She was no longer just a girl singing from her heart. She was a phenomenon, a symbol, a vessel for the hopes of millions. Yet in the quiet spaces between performances, in hotel rooms and green rooms far from the audience's gaze, the cost of that spotlight became painfully clear. Loneliness wrapped around her like a second skin. Friends from her school life faded into memories, conversations left unfinished, birthdays missed, sleep lost to rehearsals and travel. The world adored her voice, but no one truly saw the girl behind it. The girl who longed for normal laughter, for whispered secrets with peers who would never understand the magnitude of her life. Each standing ovation became a double-edged sword. Recognition of her talent, yes, but also a reminder of the isolation that came with it. Her parents, supportive yet strained, navigated the impossible task of shielding her from harm while simultaneously preparing her for a world that demanded perfection. Backstage, Simon Cowell watched with increasing concern. He had witnessed the rise of countless stars, yet none had carried the same fragile intensity. Her talent was electric, magnetic, and undeniable, but it was wrapped in a quiet despair that threatened to erupt. He noticed her brief moments of stillness, the way she would close her eyes to shut out the din of the crew, the murmurs of producers, the endless hum of expectation. In those fleeting pauses, her inner world, a maelstrom of fear, hope, and doubt, became visible. He understood, better than anyone else in the room, that her extraordinary voice was both a gift and a cage. Despite the frenzy of her life, she continued to shine on stage. The energy she radiated seemed unstoppable. Powerful vocals, emotive gestures, a magnetic presence that drew audiences into her orbit. Yet even as the world celebrated her, a quiet vulnerability gnawed at the edges of her composure. Every applause was accompanied by the silent question that haunted her nights. Could she sustain this brilliance without losing herself entirely? And then, on the night of a pivotal live performance, the invisible tension reached its apex. A misstep, subtle but undeniable, fractured the perfection she had been building, exposing the fragility that had been concealed beneath months of rehearsals and accolades. In that instant, the gap between her public triumph and private loneliness widened, a chasm too vast to ignore. Simon Cowell, witnessing the unraveling of a child whose talent had become a global phenomenon, felt the sting of helplessness, an unfamiliar emotion for the man who had built his career on control and authority. The world, oblivious to the shadows behind the stage lights, would soon see the cracks. Could a child this young survive the relentless weight of expectation? Or had the very brilliance that captivated millions begun to fracture the spirit beneath? The answer hung suspended, as precarious as her next note. The lights of the live studio burned with an intensity that felt almost cruel, casting long shadows across the polished stage floor. Every camera lens seemed to magnify her presence, every microphone a conduit for the expectations of millions. Courtney Hadwin stood poised, microphone in hand, her heart hammering like a drumbeat echoing in her chest. The crowd's murmurs rose into a crescendo, a mixture of anticipation, admiration, and unknowable judgment. The world had been waiting for this performance, and she had been waiting too, waiting to prove that she could maintain the perfection demanded by fame. Yet inside her, a storm was gathering, one that no amount of rehearsal could calm. Her first note pierced the air with the same raw power that had made her a sensation. Yet even as her voice soared, the weight of expectation pressed down harder. Each chord she sang carried not just melody, but anxiety and fear, layered so thick it threatened to suffocate. Behind her, the judges' faces were unreadable, except for Simon Cowell. He sat rigid, his usual composure strained, watching with a mix of professional pride and personal anguish. He had nurtured countless young talents, yet something about Courtney's brilliance felt perilously fragile, like a glass sculpture teetering on the edge of a table. The audience leaned forward, their cheers swelling, yet Courtney's steps faltered. A misstep in timing, a subtle pause, a fleeting wobble in pitch, was enough to crack the veneer of perfection. Gasps rippled through the crowd, the cameras catching every flicker of uncertainty that crossed her face. It was an almost imperceptible moment, yet it carried the full weight of every rehearsal, every sleepless night, every unspoken fear. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to regain control, but the pressure had already begun to unravel the threads of her composure. Simon Cowell rose slowly from his chair, his hands trembling slightly, his usual mask of stoicism shattered. Tears welled in his eyes, streaming unbidden down his face, and the studio fell into a stunned silence. Millions of viewers watching at home were unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The unflappable titan of entertainment reduced to raw, unguarded emotion. This was no ordinary critique. It was grief, worry, and helplessness condensed into a single, fragile human moment. His sorrow mirrored the invisible torment Courtney had endured for months, a silent witness to a child caught in a merciless machinery of expectation. Backstage, crew members whispered softly, hesitant to intrude, yet fully aware that this performance had crossed into uncharted emotional territory. Courtney's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she attempted to finish her song, her voice quivering, but each note carried the weight of more than melody. It carried every pressure, every fear, every heartbreak of a young girl forced to grow up too quickly. The applause that followed felt hollow, a brief acknowledgement of skill overshadowed by the stark reality of vulnerability exposed to the world. In that instant, the line between triumph and tragedy blurred. The public witnessed not only a faltering performance but the human cost of fame, the fragility beneath the extraordinary. Simon Cowell, still visibly shaken, understood the enormity of what had happened. A child's innocence had collided with an unforgiving spotlight, leaving a moment of heartbreak burned into memory. And as the cameras panned to Courtney, standing alone in the center of the stage, the question hung heavy in the air. Could she endure the unrelenting gaze of the world, or had this breaking point already changed her forever? In the quiet aftermath, the world's gaze lingered long after the cameras had stopped rolling. Courtney Hadwin, once swept up in the tidal wave of viral fame, now faced the difficult task of reclaiming her voice. Not just the voice that had captivated millions, but the voice that belonged solely to her. Away from the glare of studio lights and the relentless hum of social media, she began to confront the emotional wounds that had accumulated during her meteoric rise. Each rehearsal, each quiet practice session became a form of therapy, a deliberate reclaiming of the joy that had first drawn her to music. Simon Cowell, who had shed tears in front of millions during her breaking point, became an unexpected pillar of support, his guidance now tempered by empathy and understanding. He offered no empty praise, no pressure-laden expectation, only presence, acknowledgement, and patience. For the first time, Courtney felt a sense of safety in her brilliance, an affirmation that talent could coexist with vulnerability. Their interactions were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet each exchange carried immense weight. A look of encouragement, a hand on the shoulder, a quiet word in the hallway backstage. These moments, small yet monumental, became the foundation of her recovery. The world, meanwhile, began to recognize the emotional cost of fame on a child prodigy. Conversations ignited online and in media circles about the responsibilities of entertainment industries, the ethical obligations to young performers, and the unseen toll of constant scrutiny. Courtney's story became more than a tale of extraordinary talent. It became a lens through which millions could examine the human price of spectacle, of brilliance nurtured and tested under unforgiving lights. Courtney herself began to embrace a renewed sense of purpose. The applause no longer carried the same weight of fear. The stage was not a cage, but a platform for expression. She discovered that her true legacy would not be measured solely by viral moments or televised victories, but by resilience, authenticity, and the courage to reclaim her story. Each performance became a testament to survival, to the triumph of spirit over expectation, and to the beauty that emerges when brilliance is paired with vulnerability. Even in the glow of her comeback, shadows lingered, gentle reminders of the fragility she had endured. Yet these shadows no longer defined her. They informed her, grounding her talent in humanity, empathy, and awareness. Simon Cowell, observing the transformation of a young girl into a resilient, self-aware artist, allowed himself a private, quiet smile, understanding that the world's applause would forever be secondary to the emotional journey she had endured. As the cameras rolled once more, capturing her confident presence, the world witnessed not just a performance, but a life reclaimed. A young prodigy who had faced the merciless spotlight, endured heartbreak, and emerged with both brilliance and wisdom. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, one truth was clear. Courtney Hadwin had transcended the fragile cage of expectation to leave a legacy defined not by perfection, but by courage, resilience, and heart.